You're on, sister.
Okay, way to go. Well, good afternoon, everyone. So good to see so many of you here today. The Anti-Racism and Equity Committee of St. Pius V Catholic Church in St. Louis, Missouri, with co-sponsors, the Archdiocesan Offices of Racial Harmony and Peace and Justice, welcome you today to Black Catholic History, celebrating our ancestors with Winnie Sullivan, our presenter. I'm Sister Jen Cassani, a school sister of Notre Dame and a member of St. Pius V, a Southside Parish faith community of diverse people with a commitment to welcoming the stranger and dedicated to works of justice, peace, and charity in our church, in our city, and our world. Just a few items before we actually begin and I introduce Winnie, and that would be that the session will be recorded, and later we'll let you know how you can access this recording. The chat room will be open for questions and comments, and Vince Estrada is going to handle the chat room. So I thank you, Vince. Winnie will respond to questions after her presentation. And you may have noticed that all your microphones are muted, and that's to avoid distractions as Winnie is speaking. So it's my privilege today and joy, really, to introduce Winnie Sullivan, as I say, a woman with a mission. And she expresses her mission in this way. It is to realize the beloved community. Her action for justice, her tender, compassionate service and humility is expressed in her gifts of generosity, loving concern, faithful service to her parish community, St. Francis Xavier College Church. She is a member of the parish council and serves as the co-chair of the Anti-Racism Committee with Lisa Burks. I think she's also a member of the choir and probably a few other things I don't know. What I do know is that her gifts and service extend to many, many more people and groups and individuals too numerous to mention here. She is really a Wonder Woman. She is a writer, a publisher, an editor, a mentor, an executive director of Penultimate Press Incorporated, a nonprofit literary publishing house here in St. Louis. She spent 3 years researching the topic she will address today, a history in which we all share and by which we are all blessed. And so, Winnie, I turn it over to you. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Sister Jen, for your kind words. I'm Winnie Sullivan. I'd like to thank all of you for coming to our presentation about the history of Black Catholics in St. Louis. Especially, it's such a beautiful day, so I really appreciate that you're willing to spend this time indoors with all of us. I'd also like to thank Father Paul Neiman, a pastor of St. Pius V Catholic Church, and the parishioners there, especially members of the Anti-Racism and Racial Equity team, as well as Marie Kenyon, Director of the Archdiocesan Office of Peace and Justice, and Joyce Jones, Director of the Archdiocesan Office of Racial Harmony, for the opportunity to be with you this afternoon. And I have to extend a special thanks to Vince, the man of the hour, who is helping us with the technology today. Before we begin, I'd like to just provide a little information about how the presentation will be structured. So we'll begin with a look back at this fascinating history of Black Catholics in St. Louis. And then we've reserved some time at the end for questions and comments and points of discussion from the audience. I'd like to preface this portion of the presentation by saying that I'm not a native St. Louisan, and so I can't claim the lived experience of growing up Black and Catholic in St. Louis. It's because of my work on a biography of Sister Mary Antoinette Ebo, Franciscan Sister of Mary, that I have been immersed in the history of Catholicism in St. Louis, more broadly, Black Catholicism in the United States, and then specifically the history of Black Catholics here in St. Louis. And so training kind of a new set of eyes coming from outside of this community and looking at that history, it is an amazing story of determination, of resilience, and incredibly strong faith, and one that I'm really happy to be able to share with you today. I had the opportunity to offer a similar presentation on a couple of prior occasions during Black Catholic History Month. And I learned as people came up to speak with me afterward that some of what you're going to hear, you'll likely find both new and perhaps somewhat startling. Attendees at those earlier presentations said they had never heard anything like this before. And many were astonished to hear of the length and the depth of the history of Black Catholics in St. Louis. And they were stunned to learn of the degree to which racial separation and discrimination have occurred within our church. That experience impressed upon me the need to share this history. And again, I'm glad to be with you to do that today. So if we can start with slide 1. Excellent. Okay. So this picture probably dates from the 1940s. It's a picture of first communicants at St. Elizabeth of Hungary Catholic Church in St. Louis, and that became actually the designated African American parish in the St. Louis Archdiocese. We're going to be talking a lot more about that parish, which for years was the center of Black Catholic life in St. Louis. But let's start by looking at some important dates. So the date 1719, and that is when it is believed that African Americans were first in the St. Louis area. 1764, the date of the founding of the city of St. Louis. And then the 1770s, we're going to look at for a little bit at some church records that reveal an African American presence in St. Louis at that time. So the earliest recording of Black people in the St. Louis area was 1719, when they were brought here by the French explorer and entrepreneur, Philippe Renaud. Renaud lived during the reign of Louis XV, and he set out for Upper Louisiana in what was at the time French North America. And if you can see on that slide, that large green area, that is really the huge swath of territory that was colonized by the French. You can see it contains the whole Mississippi River, New Orleans, Mobile, Alabama, St. Louis. And so it's really just a large territory that the French had colonized. Renaud had a particular interest in the development of lead mining, and he brought enslaved Africans numbering about 500 who came from the island of Santo Domingo, the French colony of Haiti, to work in lead mines west of St. Genevieve. Right there. Both the enslaved Africans and their slaveholders spoke French, and they were at the very least nominal Catholics. A few of the enslaved working as boatmen came upriver to St. Louis from St. Genevieve. Next slide. So to bring this story to life, I've chosen to focus on one Black Catholic family whose history in the St. Louis area can be traced from before the Civil War to our current era. This is a family of Ella Madden Lancaster. And her family was Catholic for generations. Ella is the person who's kind of in the center of that photograph. And you'll see her there with her husband, Oscar, and then her daughter, Mary Elizabeth, who became an Oblate Sister of Providence. And I've chosen to highlight this family story because first I had the honor of helping to contribute a bit of research about this family. And then also because by virtue of just serendipity, I have a personal tie to this family. So what you see on that slide is a portion of the Madden Lancaster family tree. Ella's maternal grandmother, and Ella is she's actually in the fourth row of text there, but her maternal grandmother, Mary Roberson, and her great-grandmother, Ellen, had been enslaved by a French property holder in St. Genevieve. They were taught catechism by this French slaveholding family, and they learned all their prayers in French. When Mary was baptized and became Catholic, the family granted her her freedom. So now, as a free Black woman, Mary eventually comes to St. Louis, finds work as a cook with a wealthy French family, the Lucas family, and became one of a number of free Black people living in St. Louis before the Civil War. The city of St. Louis was named for King Louis IX, King of France, by the explorer Pierre Laclede, who founded the settlement in 1764. One of the first 3 deeded tracts in the new settlement was a sort of tumble-down log cabin structure, a house of worship that would eventually become the Old Cathedral, what we refer to as the Old Cathedral of St. Louis of France. And that church, until 1816, was the only church of any denomination in the city of St. Louis. Because France and Spain, the colonial powers that kind of alternately laid claim to the territory west of the Mississippi, were Catholic nations, one might say that St. Louis was destined to have a large Catholic population. And so from its very beginning, St. Louis was inhabited by Black people who were Catholic. Some were free, such as Mary Roberson, and some were brought to St. Louis, having been enslaved by the city's original settlers. Church records dating back to the 1770s show that early on, neither racial, economic, or social barriers separated worshiping Catholics from one another. From 1776 to 1788, St. Louis's first pastor, Father Bernard de Lempec, baptized 410 white people, 106 Black people, and 92 Native Americans. The Jesuit historian, Father William Fairley, has written that, and I'll quote him, the Blacks participated in much of the parish life. During the colonial days, the pioneers were far too busy providing for the essentials of life for themselves and their families to be color conscious. They battled the elements and they welcomed every hand. Together they worked, played, and prayed, end quote. At the time of the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, between 1/4 and 1/3 of the 1,000 or so inhabitants of St. Louis were Black, and all were Catholic. Now, there were a few factors that influenced racial separation, important factors that kind of changed that whole early picture, and ultimately led to a pattern of racial separation and exclusion of Blacks from most Catholic parishes. First was the movement of Anglo settlers westward into Missouri from the upper tier of Southern slaveholding states. Slavery is practiced by these newcomers tended to be more harsh than either under the French or Spanish, whose slave codes, at least nominally, granted some legal protection to slaves, imposed less rigid racial hierarchies, and often required, as we've seen, religious instruction and baptism of enslaved people. A second factor was Missouri's entrance into the Union as a slave state in 1821, with a state constitution that codified racist sentiment and penalized such actions as educating African Americans. For example, by 1847, the education of Blacks, free or enslaved, was prohibited in Missouri on penalty of fine and/or imprisonment. And a third factor was the influence, especially in the mid-19th century, of European immigrants, especially of German and Irish descent, who wanted religious services to be offered in their native languages and in a manner that preserved their cultural heritage and traditions. Here's an example of the growth of the immigrant population. In 1843, Bishop Peter Kenrick of St. Louis petitioned the Leopoldine Society in Vienna for financial assistance in building a Catholic church, St. Mary of Victories, for German-speaking Catholics who were concentrated in the neighborhood of 3rd and Gratiot. At the time he sent that appeal, there were approximately 6,000 German Catholics living in St. Louis. By 1860, just a little more than 15 years later, there were 60,000 German immigrants, most of whom were Catholic, living in St. Louis. Thus, under Archbishop Kenrick and later Cardinal Glennon, a patchwork of ethnic and national churches developed that grew to become the Archdiocese of St. Louis. St. Francis Xavier, the college church, originally at 9th and Lucas, was the first English-speaking parish in the city, and it was built to serve the growing Irish population. So too did St. Patrick, St. Bridget of Arran, St. Malachy, and St. Lawrence O'Toole. St. Mary of Victories, St. Boniface, St. Joseph, and Most Holy Trinity served German-speaking Catholics. St. Bonaventure was founded as an Italian national church. St. John Nepomuk served Bohemian Catholics, while St. Casimir and St. Stanislaus were predominantly Polish. Gradually, with the imposition of parish boundaries and increasingly segregated housing patterns, there were few Catholic churches in St. Louis where African Americans felt comfortable practicing their faith. Exceptions were Saints Mary and Joseph in the Carondelet neighborhood. There was actually a concentration of Black people living there. And then St. Vincent de Paul in the Frenchtown area, just south of downtown. So checking in again with Ella's family, we find that her grandmother, Mary Roberson, met and married a man, James Alexander Madden. And James worked as a drayman or a carter. Now, we don't have people in those occupations now, but he was a person who, with a wagon and horses, made a living by transporting goods. James Madden's freedom was obtained via a $500 bond. And I'm not really sure, not found something yet that has told me how he acquired that money, which was a significant sum at that time, but perhaps it was from saving over many years from his work. But anyway, that bond was secured by John Fletcher Darby, who in 1835 became the 4th mayor of the city of St. Louis. Mary and James had 2 children, Charles Joseph Madden and Ella Teresa Madden. Ella was the aunt after whom our Ella, depicted in that photograph, was named. John Darby is an example of the folks who were moving into the St. Louis area. He was born in North Carolina. Then he moved with his father to Missouri in 1818 to work on a farm. They moved in 1825 to Kentucky and then returned to Missouri. And Darby went to law school, he became the mayor, and later a congressional representative from the state. But you can see that kind of influx of people from that upper tier of slaveholding states. In 1836, Bishop Joseph Rosati, who was the first bishop of the Diocese of St. Louis, gave the Jesuits permission to found their parish in conjunction with St. Louis College, which they had acquired in 1829 and chartered in 1832 as St. Louis University. Although the parish congregation met for several years in the student chapel, it was evident from the beginning that the parish was going to need its own church building. So plans for that were begun, and then on April the 12th, 1840, the cornerstone of the new church was laid by Bishop Rosati. It was situated at 9th and Christie. Christie was the original name of the street. Later, Lucas. Remember, Mary worked for the Lucas family. And the church opened for use on Palm Sunday in 1843. So I'm going to be talking a lot about the Jesuits because at one point they were given charge of the entire Black Catholic population in St. Louis. But I do want to acknowledge along the way contributions of other religious orders who serve the Black community. Before I get to that, I just want to point out that on that slide you're looking at right now, that is a picture in profile of the college church when it was at 9th and Lucas. So some early courageous efforts. In 1845, the Sisters of St. Joseph opened a school for African-American girls, which, given the resistance of the St. Louis community, a group of white men stormed the convent, they were required to close. In 1856, the Sisters of Mercy attempted to open a school for African-American children. It met a similar fate. In 1858, Father Peter Koning was the first St. Louis Jesuit to be assigned to minister to Black Catholics in the city. And he secured the uppermost gallery of the college church as a worship space for Black Catholics. By 1860, as the Civil War approached, there were actually more free than enslaved Black people living in St. Louis. A number of them had become financially well established, and a significant portion of those folks were Catholic. By 1872, the number of Black Catholics worshiping in the college church had outgrown that space. So under the leadership of Father Ignatius Pankin, Jesuit, who had by then assumed their spiritual care, the community, with proceeds from a Christmas fair, was able to purchase the old Vinegar Hill Hall at 14th and Gay. And that structure had housed a Baptist congregation, afterwards a Presbyterian congregation, and then it began a new life as St. Elizabeth of Hungary Parish, the citywide African-American Catholic Church. In allowing the formation of St. Elizabeth's, Archbishop Kenrick, whom you see here, did not exclude Blacks from other parishes, but he did insist, and I'll quote, that it should be carefully published that the church is exclusively for the colored people and sacraments will not be administered to whites, end quote. Kenrick regarded St. Elizabeth's in much the same way as he did the national and ethnic churches in St. Louis. It was the church for African-American Catholics. And as a result of that designation, African-Americans became increasingly separated from the rest of the St. Louis Catholic population. But despite that separation, Black Catholics in St. Louis, that population was tremendously resilient, a faith-filled people, evidenced by the vitality of St. Elizabeth's Parish. By 1889, the parishioners at that parish began taking part in 5 successive National Negro Conferences organized by another prominent Black Catholic, Daniel Rudd. And these congresses really they were like the precursor or forerunner of the National Black Catholic Congresses that occur annually now, today. Lincoln Valley, who was editor of the St. Louis Advance, was elected president of the National Assembly of Black Catholics. So now we're looking again at the family tree. Mary Roberson Madden and James Alexander Madden's children, Charles and Ella, would eventually become members of St. Elizabeth's Parish. Before the founding of St. Elizabeth's, they, like all Black Catholics, had attended the college church. They were married there, they had family funerals there, they had their children baptized there. But with the founding of St. Elizabeth's, they became active members of that parish. Charles Madden was an altar boy for Father Pankin, and he would sit with Father Pankin to read the lives of the saints. Charles actually wanted to pursue a call to the religious life, but was unsuccessful in part because there was no seminary in the United States at that time that accepted Black men. For a time, Charles moved away from St. Louis and he lived in Savannah, Georgia. And that's where he met the woman he would marry. And you'll see them also on the family tree, Mary Louise LaRose. His family had been Catholic for 2 generations. Together, he and Mary Louise had a large family. It included 1 daughter named after Charles's sister, Ella Teresa Madden. In 1912, Charles and his family left Savannah and they relocated to his hometown of St. Louis. By 1913, St. Elizabeth's under Father John McGuire moved from its original site to what had been an old family mansion at 2721 Pine Street. That house had belonged to the Walsh family, whose son had entered the priesthood and for whom a chapel had been added to that house. The site was large enough to allow the community to have a church, a school, and a community center. St. Elizabeth's had a tremendous number of parish organizations and activities, particularly during the period of the 1920s and 30s, under the leadership of Father William Marcoux, who became the pastor in 1927. These are just a few of the activities undertaken by parishioners at St. Elizabeth's. They published St. Elizabeth's Chronicle, which grew into a nationally recognized publication called the Interracial Review. They inaugurated closed retreats for women and for men. They presented an annual musical comedy, many of which were written by Jesuit Father Daniel Lord. For many years, they did that. They were the host in 1931 to the largest and most successful convention of Black Catholics in the history of the United States. They established a council of the Knights of St. Peter Claver in St. Louis. They sponsored a weekly broadcast on radio station WEW, the Interracial Hour, and they sent several young women and at least 1 young man into the religious life. They assisted in the opening of St. Mary's Infirmary to Black patients, and they instructed, baptized, and confirmed thousands of souls. Ella Madden, the daughter of Mary and Charles, and again, that's Ella there in the photograph, she was 20 years old when her family moved to St. Louis. She went to Sumner High School, where she met her future husband, Oscar Lee Lancaster Jr. She trained briefly to be a teacher, and she taught school until 1922, when she and Oscar were married. He had converted to Catholicism and had been baptized at St. Elizabeth's the year before they married. And I read that Ella said she was not attracted to Oscar. She did not fall in love with him until after he converted. Together, they had 5 children: Oscar Lee Lancaster III, Mary Elizabeth, Charles, Christine, and Benjamin, all of whom were baptized at St. Elizabeth's. The family members were active in so many of the parish activities that I've spoken about. Ella was a catechist. She wrote for St. Elizabeth's Chronicle, and she was a member of the Ladies' Sodality. Oscar was a member of the parish men's clubs. The children were involved in sports and musical activities, and Ella and Oscar were actually very helpful in the founding of St. Joseph's High School, the Catholic secondary school for African Americans, which opened in 1937 and which all of their children attended. But Ella was aware of discrimination that her family faced when venturing beyond St. Elizabeth's. She recounted her son's experience when he went to confession at another parish, which was on his way home from work. And I'll quote her here. He would work on Saturdays. Then Charles said he could go to confession at St. Matthew's on his way home and to Holy Communion at St. Elizabeth's in the morning. So he went to confession, and this priest heard his confession, but told him, don't come back here to confession anymore. Go to your own church. When he came home, he wouldn't go to Holy Communion the next day because he was mad. I had to talk to that child and tell him that priest was a human being like the rest of us are human. He can sin, and he'll have to go to confession about that because that was wrong. This kind of experience was validated by another member of St. Elizabeth's, Adrian Johnson, an organist. He was actually an organist at several St. Louis Catholic churches, who remembered the racial discrimination he experienced at Mass. I'll quote him. Right here in St. Louis, the good Father Collins, who was the pastor of Visitation, didn't want Blacks to come into his church to attend Mass. He didn't care if you had a soul or not. You weren't going to be saved by him. Visitation, St. Matthew, St. Mark. Well, I never went to St. Rose in those days, but the other churches like that, they had segregated sections, the last 2 or 3, maybe 4 pews. And those were the only places you could sit in those churches. You would go to communion after everybody else if you wanted to, which was a good thing for your humility if you wanted to practice it. Rather, I would walk down to St. Elizabeth's than go through that treatment. So we can't talk about St. Elizabeth's without spending a little more time talking about Father William Marcoux, a remarkable man and somewhat controversial, but a determined man of action. From his time at St. Stanislaus Seminary in Florissant, where he began his formation as a Jesuit, he had, along with a few of his fellow seminarians, including his brother John, dedicated his life to serving African Americans. His family, which came from Minnesota, had acquired wealth generations back from land that they owned in the Caribbean and from the labor of enslaved people there. And that was a fact which I believe haunted Marcoux and caused him to feel a sense of indebtedness. And he was passionate about repaying that debt, some would say rash. When he came to St. Louis University to begin his studies, he was warned, do not cross Grand Avenue. It's dangerous. East of Grand was where the Mill Creek Valley neighborhood was located. It was home to a large concentration of the Black community. Of course, that is exactly where Marcoux went, meeting and getting to know the residents and evangelizing the people there. He was patriarchal. After he became pastor at St. Elizabeth's, he would go into meetings of white Catholics in St. Louis and say, I'm here to tell you about the Black man's perspective. Presumptuous, but well-intentioned. A man with a good heart, who with his brother is remembered with deep affection by many Black Catholic families in St. Louis. Father Marcoux actually spent his final days at Marquette University, my alma mater, and we were actually there at the same time, but I did not know him. I'm sure we would have disagreed on some issues. He supported the war in Vietnam, and I was taking part in sit-ins at the St. Joan of Arc Chapel opposing the war. but I would have loved to meet him. He was a remarkable man. So I've mentioned the role of the Jesuits in spiritually caring for the Black Catholic community, but I also want to recognize many other religious orders who addressed both the spiritual and material needs of African American Catholics. The Sisters of the Blessed Sacrament opened a mission in 1914 next to St. Elizabeth's, and in 1916 began a 2-room school in St. Elizabeth's Rectory for 125 children. They also taught at St. Nicholas School, having been invited to St. Louis. In a letter from Father Marcoux, although he was yet in formation, he had not been ordained yet, he wrote a letter to Mother Catherine Drexel, inviting the sisters here to teach. St. Nicholas was founded in 1866, but gradually its white Catholic population moved west. And its complex, which included a school, fell into disuse. The school then became a warehouse until Marcoux asked permission to return the building to its former use and asked the Blessed Sacrament sisters to teach there. And 2 sisters came to teach at St. Nicholas, and they were pretty dismayed when they saw the state of the building, but they all worked hard, got it in order, and we're expecting just a few children to show up to register. When the school doors opened in 1924, 500 children were there to register. Later, the Sisters of the Most Precious Blood took over operation of the school. The Servants of the Divine Word took charge of St. Nicholas Parish in 1926, after which the church served as a mission for the downtown district and evangelized the African American population, who meanwhile had moved into that neighborhood. The Helpers of the Holy Souls taught catechism to public school children, taught sewing classes at St. Benedict's Center, which was at 3900 West Bell. At the Sacred Heart Center, 4400 Garfield, they taught home economics to moms. They supervised scouting and recreational activities for children, including a drum and bugle corps, and they visited the sick. Sister Flora Sappert was a prominent member of that community, and her name would be recognized by many older Black Catholics. The Daughters of Charity taught at St. Malachy's School after that parish was placed in charge of the Jesuits in 1941. St. Malachy's also became a thriving parish with a variety of men's clubs and ladies' clubs, also a parish credit union and a retail commodities cooperative. So I just mentioned some of these things to give you a sense of all of the activity that was occurring, kind of the scope of that activity. There were also the Oblate Sisters of Providence, founded in 1829 in Baltimore by Mother Mary Elizabeth Lang. And this is an order of African American religious women. They operated a school for girls, St. Rita Academy in St. Louis, as well as the St. Francis Orphanage and 2 other mission schools. They too conducted lessons in sewing and cooking, they taught catechism, and they attended to the social welfare of African Americans. The Sisters of St. Joseph opened St. Joseph High School in 1937. I referred to that earlier. And the final location of that school was 4100 Page Boulevard. At the height of its operation, approximately 170 students were enrolled there. And many Black St. Louisans remember Father Patrick Malloy. He was the school's athletic director, under whom the school's teams competed in integrated football and basketball games and track meets. The Sisters of St. Mary, who began to provide inpatient and outpatient care to African Americans at St. Mary's Infirmary in 1933. And I'll stress the inpatient care because there were virtually not other adequate resources available at the time. the facilities, the few that existed, were terribly under-resourced and just completely inadequate. And so in 1933, the Sisters of St. Mary, now the Franciscan Sisters of Mary, opened their infirmary for the inpatient and outpatient care of African Americans. And that was the year that the cornerstone was laid at Homer G. Phillips Hospital, and 4 years actually before Homer G. opened. So many times when you hear about the history of healthcare in St. Louis and healthcare as it relates to African Americans, people point to Homer G. Phillips Hospital, which was a gem of a facility, a tremendous resource on the north side that offered care and training. But 4 years before Homer G. was open, St. Mary's Infirmary was open and was providing care. The Sisters of St. Mary also founded a school of nursing for Black women and a novitiate for African American women, which in 1946, Sister Mary Antona Ebo entered. Charles Madden, Ella's father, actually died at St. Mary's Infirmary in 1935, and he was interred at Calvary Cemetery. In addition to institutions serving African Americans in St. Louis City, there were missions in and around the area. St. Peter Claver Mission got its start in 1916 when seminarians from St. Stanislaus catechized the people living in the community of Anglem, which became Robertson, Missouri. Neither one of those municipalities or communities exists any longer. Blessed Martin de Porres Mission, located in Meacham Park, the African American community in Kirkwood. Their children received catechism classes and social activities in a recreation center next to the church. Holy Guardian Angels Mission was located in Kinloch, started by Jesuit Father Arnold Garvey in 1926, and afterward ministered to by Father Otto Moorman. It consisted of a church, a rectory, a school run by the Oblate Sisters of Providence, a parish hall, a medical center, and a retreat house for men that was funded by the real estate developer, Charles Vatterott. St. Clement's Mission, consisting of a chapel and school on Finney Avenue, and founded in 1941 by the Redemptorists who were at St. Alphonsus Rock. The school was run by the Oblate Sisters of Providence, and St. Clement's too had many church and school organizations. There were some additional and very important turning points in Black Catholic history that I wanted to mention briefly. 1944, the integration of St. Louis University. So many things led up to that occurring, but the kind of immediate catalysts included a call that came to Father John Marcoux, who was then at St. Malachy's. A woman, Maddie Williams, whose daughter had attended St. Elizabeth's, had gone away to high school, but wanted to attend a Catholic university. Marcoux contacted the president of the university, later attended a meeting of the school's faculty and administrators who opposed the young woman's admission. Marcoux spoke in favor of her admission, and meanwhile had been visiting with the city editor of the Post-Dispatch, who had been challenging, the Post had been challenging racial discrimination at that time at the University of Missouri. At the same time, Father Claude Heighthouse, whose picture you see there on that slide in the far right, he was a professor of art and archaeology and a director of publications at SLU. He became aware of the university's position on the admission of Black students and made integration the subject of what can only be described as an explosive sermon at a student mass in February of 1944, at which he made an impassioned plea for students to rid themselves of racial prejudice. Heighthouse also distributed his homily to the university student newspaper and to the Post, And though he and Marku were both censured by their superiors and reassigned, together they were largely responsible for the admission of 5 African-American students for the summer session of 1944. And you can see there's a small clip there on that slide of some of those students registering. In 1946, we have the arrival of Archbishop Joseph Ritter, who in 1947 desegregated Catholic schools and said Black Catholics will go to their parish churches. There would be no segregated Catholic schools or churches in St. Louis, a decision that led to the eventual closing of St. Joseph High School and St. Elizabeth's in 1950. Ritter built Cardinal Glennon Hospital to serve all children, regardless of race. And in 1955, he desegregated all Catholic hospitals. Another familiar image there might be Father John Shockley. Monsignor Shockley would be appointed pastor of St. Bridget's in 1961. And he would bring an army of volunteers to the area around the Pruitt-Igoe housing complex to evangelize the neighborhood and to provide social service to that community. Ritter, said by some to be the foremost prelate in the US during the 20th century on matters of race, would go on to form the Archdiocesan Commission on Human Rights in 1963. And he would approve the participation by St. Louis clergy, religious, and laity in the civil rights marches in Selma in 1965. And Sister Antonia Ebo had a prominent role in one of those marches. Finally, in 1970, the Archdiocese had its first African-American priest, Father Henry Harrison. As the Black population in St. Louis expanded north and west, parishes that had once been all white became predominantly African-American. Those were St. Bridget, St. Matthew, St. Leo, St. Teresa, Sacred Heart, St. Anne, Holy Rosary, St. Engelbert, Visitation, Holy Ghost, St. Barbara, St. Rose, St. Alphonsus Rock, St. Mark, Blessed Sacrament, and St. Philip Neri, among others. Some of those parishes have closed now. Many have merged because the physical plants were just so large and too expensive to maintain. So there is one final chapter in the story of the Madden Lancaster family that I want to share with you. Ella and Oscar's oldest son, Oscar Lee III, was encouraged by Father Marku to enter the military. He entered the Navy, and from there was able to attend Loyola University in Chicago to pursue an accounting degree. That person, Oscar Lee Lancaster, became a friend of my family for many years as I was growing up in Chicago. Over time, we lost contact, and I was aware that he passed in 1979. But after I moved to St. Louis, I thought I would try to find his sister, Mary Elizabeth, whom I knew had become an Oblate Sister of Providence. So as I was searching for Mary Elizabeth, I was going about my normal work and extracurricular activities, a big portion of which for me has always involved music, singing in the Archdiocesan choir, in my parish choir, sometimes at the Carmelite Monastery. And one day, listening to my car radio, I heard this wonderful music of Advent. The announcer said that the CD, Advent at Ephesus, had been recorded by a religious community, the Benedictines of Mary, and that the CD had topped the sacred music chart that year. So I ordered it immediately, and inside there were liner notes and pictures of members of that community. Strikingly, in the pictures, there was one diminutive Black nun. And I had to admit, the question that first came to mind when I saw her there, because Gower, Missouri is in the Kansas City metropolitan area, but it's pretty remote. It's like the Boondocks. So when I saw her there, I thought, what the heck is she doing there? Anyway, I continued looking for Mary Elizabeth. And as Sister Antona would say, in God's providence, I stumbled on a lengthy description of her on the internet. It described her life as a teacher and archivist for the Oblates of Providence, and then noted that after many years, she sought a more contemplative life. Finally, after 50 years, she made the difficult decision to leave the Oblates of Providence, and with the assistance of Bishop James Timlin of the Diocese of Scranton, she founded a new order located in Gower, Missouri, the Benedictines of Ephesus. So she was that little Black nun whose picture was included with the CD liner notes. She had taken the religious name Sister Mary Wilhelmina, a feminine form of William, in honor of Father William Marcoux. Unfortunately, by the time I learned this and was about to act on it, she passed before I was able to meet her. But having helped to contribute a little research on a book about her life, and then meeting a member of her family at a previous Black Catholic History Month presentation, that sort of brought things full circle for me. So in summary, let me say that African American Catholics were in St. Louis since before its founding. Throughout a significant portion of that history, the Catholic Church in St. Louis neglected multiple opportunities for evangelization. And that is not to take away from the contributions of clergy and religious who did serve that community. But there were opportunities for evangelization that I believe were lost. The church remained silent when it should have spoken out, for example, during the Civil War. It condoned the displacement of the Black community by consenting to so-called urban renewal projects, such as that involving the Mill Creek Valley, or actively engaged in racial discrimination. Nevertheless, the African American Catholic community in St. Louis, supported and served by some dedicated clergy, committed religious, it remains strong and active and faithful to the current day. So on that last slide there, it's the second to the last, you see some celebrations of Catholic liturgy that include aspects of African American culture, rich, colorful garb, African cloth on the altar, a joyful kind of expression in the liturgy, all included without changing any of the rubrics of the Mass. And so these are among the gifts Black Catholics bring to the church. And there, under the text on that slide, you'll see what is called the Gi Nyami symbol. It's ubiquitous in Ghana. It literally means except for God. And I was a little confused when I heard that at first. But it means no one has seen the beginning of the world, nor will anyone see the end, except for God. It represents the omnipotence, the omnipresence, and the omniscience of God. And it encapsulates the faith of African people who see the involvement of God in every aspect of human life. On that last slide, I provided just a few resources that I used in preparing this presentation. You'll also see websites for St. Pius V and St. Francis Xavier College Church, where we hope to be posting a recording of this presentation. I thank you for attending this afternoon, and I'm happy to try to address any questions you may have.
I'm going to say thank you before we start with the chat. Maybe it'll give you time to think of a question or two. Winnie, I want to thank you 1,000-fold for the hours of time that you put into this presentation. It was just a remarkable history and opened my eyes to a lot that I didn't know, but also to some names that I did remember and know. So you have really shared and celebrated our ancestry together, our faith ancestry together. And I thank you so very, very, very much. And I'm going to turn it over to Vince now, who We have one or other question in the chat room or comments.
Great, great. Yes, sister, let me just say, it's a labor of love, really. And it's been a tremendous learning experience for me as well. And I just stand in awe at that history and what the Black community was able to accomplish, and with respect and admiration for everyone who contributed to that. Mhm.
Thank you. I want to echo Sister Jen's comments. Thank you, Winnie. By the way, you said you went to Marquette University?
I did.
So did I. We must chat afterwards.
MU rah.
There you go. This will not digress into discussions of all things Marquette, but we will talk later. If we have a scheduled stop for 4:30. So if you have any questions, probably the easiest way with this large group is to type them in the chat, and I'll read them aloud if people don't have access to the chat for Winnie to answer. So far, Winnie, all you're getting is a lot of love. This was beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much. Very informative. I learned so much today, and I'm in awe of the perseverance of my Black sisters and brothers. I echo that. It's amazing, the power and how many sacred spaces we have in St. Louis over the years. So anybody got any questions, we're happy to share them with Winnie. And it's okay to take a couple minutes, of course.
Yes. And let me just say, if you don't have questions now, I certainly will be happy to spend time talking with you about this history and address them. You can always find me at the College Church.
Well, I'll go ahead and ask my question. One is that it's because I work in public education, so I'm always interested in the issue of education and integration. And I know that Joseph Ritter did desegregate the schools, but what in fact happened to Black Catholics that were seeking educational opportunities in the Catholic schools? I know that he desegregated it, but were they able to really have access to all the Catholic education opportunities in St. Louis, practically speaking?
Mm-hmm. So the short answer to that question is no, they were not. That for a variety of reasons, that access to education it certainly did not occur immediately after Archbishop Ritter desegregated the schools. So yeah, and I think that's been an ongoing struggle, actually, Vince, for many reasons. Again, transportation and expense sometimes, and so yes, there. Some have been fortunate. My anti-racism team co-chair, Lisa Burks, who's on this call, and I, not long ago, were looking at some pictures from the early history of the College Church. And there was a photograph in there from 1947 of a classroom of children, and they were receiving a blessing in the classroom. And there was one African-American child in that picture. And so she had to be among the first to be able to access that education there. So yeah, I would say not all who desired it have been able to obtain it, and that is an ongoing concern.
So first question from the group is from Ruth Ersman. Thank you for an amazing presentation. This is a big, heady question here. Has there been a historical analysis of the impact of the large number of Catholic schools in the city, and there's still quite a few, on the difficulty of integrating education in St. Louis public schools and a citywide commitment to quality education?
I don't know the answer to that, Ruth, but I dare say there has not been. At least I've not seen any analysis of that nature. And Vince, if you're working in public education, you may be closer to that certainly than I am. But I have not seen that analysis, and I would say it is sorely needed.
Mm-hmm. Next question. Since the housing patterns in St. Louis seem difficult to change, how can we work towards greater integration in worship?
We have to make an effort. So we have to partner with other parishes and join together, with any opportunity that we have for shared liturgies. We have to network with one another and really enjoy, the richness of liturgical celebrations throughout St. Louis. I'll make this little confession that when I don't have a choir duty, I really like during the summer to go around to different parishes and just, to experience Mass there. And they can be remarkably different, kind of the cultural trappings from one parish to another. But that is enjoyable to me. And so we have to create other opportunities for doing that. The housing patterns, that is a huge problem to tackle. And in some respects, it's entrenched and it's going to be years of effort. But we can work to be in one another's presence. And we just have to recognize it and create the opportunities to do that.
A question from the pastor of St. Charles Borromeo Church, Father Dotson. He noticed in the old records that there are baptismal records for enslaved Blacks at St. Charles, but not marriages. Do you know if it was church law that prevented them from marrying, civil law, or both in the Catholic Church?
So I don't, although what I will say is that I believe, again, the French and Spanish who were enslavers were somewhat more inclined to see the enslaved married as part of religious practice. However, I mean, when you think about the practice of slavery, you know that part of that was the dissolution of families, the separation of families. So undoubtedly, that has to be taken into account, and perhaps no record was desired. But and marriages were not, and unions were not respected at any rate. But so I am aware that, again, for French and Spanish enslavers, there may have been a little more respect for the sacrament of marriage and records maintained.
Deacon Quinn comments, thank you so much for this fine history, but also such a sad history of missed opportunities. Gail Gilker asks, how do you see the Archdiocese as a big institution reaching out today on issues of education and housing in the Black community?
That's a tough one. I know that, currently there are concerns about education in particular, with number of school closures on the north side. And in housing, I can't say that I've seen particular strategies yet coming from the Archdiocese. I am hopeful that with the new strategic plan that we're hearing about now, that there will be a more comprehensive approach to all of these issues, education, housing, that the importance of those for, really for the practice of Catholic social teaching and all that we're compelled to do when we adhere to the principles of Catholic social teaching, that those will be embraced, and perhaps we'll see some more concrete activity regarding those issues with this new plan. That is my hope.
Thanks, Winnie. Matt Crowley, comment and question. Excellent presentation, Winnie. I suspect it only scratches the surface of the history of the resilience and perseverance of Black Catholics. What do you see as the bigger, more significant challenges facing the church today in the evangelization and integration of Black and other non-white groups of people?
Well, first, Matt, you're absolutely right. It does just scratch the surface. I always feel when I'm doing this presentation or presentations like this, that I am sort of talking at the speed of light, and that There's so much more to say. The challenges remain some of the things that we've been talking about. Still tremendous segregation in the city of St. Louis, and St. Louis is not by any stretch of the imagination alone in that regard. But I have to say that I feel some encouragement, again, from another movement that's underway in the church, and that is the call to synodality. And so listening to one another, becoming a listening church where all gifts are affirmed, all contributions are respected. I'm hoping that that will drive a greater evangelization and inclusion of all people. I mean, I am sort of a universalist actually in my outreach, in my outlook. And I enjoy learning about other cultures and their contributions. I know at St. Pius, there's a large Burmese community and, other large Catholic communities, a large Vietnamese community in the St. Louis area. It is enriching for us to share in that, and just as I'm sharing this history with you today, that is the history we all share. And so it is a challenge to bridge historic barriers, but I'm hoping that this call to synodality is going to help us cross over that bridge to some degree. And undoubtedly, it's going to take time, a long time, but each one of us is going to have to act to see that be realized.
These are some big questions and good ones. This is more of a straightforward one. Winnie, is your book about Saint and Sister Antona available? And thank you so much for this wonderful presentation.
It is not yet. I hope to be wrapping that up this year. Martha and I are in a group together. And so I expect, because she asks me this, Winnie, how's it going? And so, we're moving along. Progress is being made. Thanks, Martha.
Yeah. Sister Janet Crane asked a comment, thank you so much for your insights. I was wondering about Catholic cemeteries. Interesting question. Dred Scott was eventually buried at Calvary Cemetery, which is a Catholic cemetery. But what about the Black community prior to that? What's the history on Blacks being buried in Catholic cemeteries?
Yeah, and I have to say that is a history that I'm not really well familiar with, especially not in the St. Louis area. What I do know about burial in cemeteries generally in the United States is that, racial segregation extended even to that. And so when we were buried in the same cemetery, there was a Black section and there was a white section. Mm. The degree to which that is true here, I don't know, but it's something that is very intriguing and worth pursuing and learning more about.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Next question, again, back to education, because the connection between education and the Catholic Church is strong, particularly in St. Louis. Do you see the upcoming consolidation of churches and schools throughout the Archdiocese as an opportunity to further positive integration efforts?
Yeah, so this is what I would say about that. I don't know that the details of this plan have been really disclosed. So I am not sure to what degree there's going to be a resulting consolidation. But it depends on kind of the area in which any possible consolidation would take place. It could further integration or not. So I think, we have to kind of wait and see on that and see how that develops, and also hopefully have opportunities to contribute to that. But again, I just encourage people, don't wait until we have a plan for how to do it, just start doing it right now. You know, each one of us make opportunities to, you know, to be present, to accompany one another, to visit parishes, groups. You know, Lisa and I have had, again, my co-chair of the anti-racism team. We've had really a great opportunity and found it so beneficial to visit and doing the work of anti-racism parishes, many parishes in St. Louis. And so, yeah, no need to wait for a plan to do it. Just start doing it now.
Yeah. It's clear from looking at some of the themes of this question, Wendy, that the interplay, intersectionality of faith communities and education and housing are really embedded structurally in St. Louis and challenging to
Oh.
untangle.
Absolutely. And you can see how in the growth of the Diocese of St. Louis and later the Archdiocese, how that came to be.
Mhm.
And so, you know, how difficult a challenge that is to overcome. It really takes intention and an action on the part of each of us to begin to overcome that.
Yeah. Let's see, question from Peggy. I understand that what will be driving consolidation is the shortage of priests. What can be done to encourage Black men to enter the priesthood and permanent diaconate?
Mhm. Of course, that's part of a broader question. What can be done to encourage vocations and entry into the religious life at all? I was just reading something today about, you know, the group of nuns, NONES, and how it's expected that soon that will supersede the number of Catholics in the United States, if it has not done so already. And so I think probably an important answer in that regard is relevance. People have to understand that the church and the church's mission is relevant to their lives. And that just has to be made clear. And I think that is the critical factor there. That this is a church that embraces everyone, where everybody is welcomed, and that the mission of the church and the activities of the church have relevance to our lives.
I think that was our final question. We do have a couple more minutes. People wanted to throw a question in. But if not, let's see. Oh, here we go. From Maurice. It was very interesting to see all the missions and anti-racism work from the early founding of Catholic parishes and schools in St. Louis, Black, white, and Native American. Synodality at work. And Peggy sent her thank you for tackling her question previously. I think that might be our last question.
Could I ask a question?
Sure.
I don't know how to type this or do this chat stuff, but an important part of worship is the music. And in February, I heard some Catholic women talking about their experience of being Catholic in St. Louis. And it wasn't until they got to Rock Church that they felt at home. And I was in Kinloch. I went to Kinloch to that Holy Guardian Angels, and that music was rocking. And I went to another church, and it was so staid, and nobody was moving. Who drives that music? Was that the pastor? I know it was the music director at Guardian Angels in Kinloch. She really got those kids singing, and the other one was just very dead. I guess it was very white. So who would pull that forth or affect that music? It wasn't the congregation, obviously, because the congregation was Black, but the music was. Maybe it was,
Yeah, I think, well, I think it is the congregation. The congregation makes known the music that has most meaning and does the sort of thing that music can do, that is, it's kind of transcendent in a way. And the congregations make that known. And, I've been in parishes where folks just move forward to the music director and say, I want to hear this. Well, I mean, there is a concern, are you going to have folks who can really make that happen in terms of the quality of the music? But a gift of Black Catholics is a joy, as I said before, a joyful expression, and that is made known in music. And so it's really a treasure. I know people often say that going to the Rock Church and other predominantly Black Catholics, there is an expression of joy and a feeling that, that is not always the case, certainly in every parish. But yeah, I think people go to the music director and say, I'd like to hear this, and, can we try this? And that's how that comes to pass.
Peggy wanted to share with Joyce. I asked her a question. Did she ever see a German rocking? So I'm not sure what the answer to that question is. I'm gonna go move on.
I'm a rocking German.
A question from Marie, a person from St. Pius. Do you know anything about the experience of Black Catholics in the housing projects in St. Louis?
Actually, I've talked with a couple of folks who were living in Pruitt-Igoe at the time that Monsignor Shockley was there. And I learned a lot by talking with them about folks who would come around to their homes and visit regularly, and what that meant to those families and what it meant in terms of evangelization, because some folks actually converted to Catholicism because of that contact. So I do recall those discussions, and it's just an example of, the kind of action that's necessary to meet people and to reach them where they are.
It looks like it might be like the people opportunity, maybe throw in one more question maybe before we wrap up. About 6 minutes left.
I guess I would like to know, Winnie, if you had only one thing to say to us before you left us. And I think this has been really a great opportunity to ask questions and to get hope and to get some direction for the future. But if there was one last thing that you would want to offer to us, what would that be?
So Sister Jen knows, because her order taught me in high school that, one thing about me is that my work is publishing, and I love the process of learning in books. And so I would say, educate yourselves now, read more, learn more, look at some of those resources on that last slide, and, just dive in there because there is so much to learn. It's work that we can do on our own individually. And that's what I would encourage people to do. Reaching out, relationships, that's very important, but also take the time to do some self-learning, some reading, and become familiar with these things. I think that is, one of the best bits of advice I could offer.
Thank you so much.
There was a question about providing those resources in email. So I have everyone's email address if you pre-registered. Absolutely, I can absolutely easily do that. Happy to do that. So I'll do that right after the meeting, because otherwise I may forget. So I'll do that soon after the meeting's over. Thank you,
Once
Kathy, for that
again,
question.
I want to thank you, Vince, for all that you did to bring us together, because you were You were the glue that started this for on yours with the Zoom and the spreadsheet and everything. So that's a mountain of work. And thank you so very much.
Thank you for discovering that glitch or about an hour and a half before the meeting, Sister. That we had two meetings.
We did have a little glitz, but we got through it
We
fine.
did, yeah.
So thank you all and have a wonderful evening. And maybe we will see each other again. Who knows? We could have a part 2.
That's right. And any final thoughts, Winnie?
And no, just again, thank you for being here today. And as Sister Jen said about me at the beginning, my hope is the realization of the beloved community. And here we are, all gathered. And so, yes, let's go forth from here with the spirit of hope.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Amen.
Amen. Amen, sister.
Thank you very much.
And brother. Bye-bye, everybody.
Wow.
Wonder if we're going to stay on.
We can stay on, Sister, if you want to for a second.
Yeah, let's do just for a minute.